Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cardano Live. I have Dr. Michael Liesenfelt with us here today. We're going to talk about the Cardano network parameters. He submitted a draft CIP, which is available over on the Cardano forum. So if you check out the link down below in the description, we have a link to the forum where he has a description of the CIP. There's also a link to the CIP itself, the draft document that he has written up, and you can learn more information there to see what he is working on. Thank you, Michael, for being here with us today. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing awesome, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And as we know, Cardano is a really awesome and robust system. There's been a lot of work put into it, but there's always room for improvement. And that's why we have the CIP process so that people can provide those improvements, make it available to the community. You can read about it, provide feedback, and let us know more. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about yourself, and you can tell us about the CIP.
Sure. My background, I have always been a science and engineering type. Like I just love science and engineering, and that led me to look at like the world and energy, and naturally nuclear comes up. So I spent my undergrad and grad working in and pursuing, nuclear engineering, and eventually, after a bunch of different jobs, I've come back to academia as a research assistant professor at the University of Tennessee in nuclear engineering. So my day job is to do, really high tech radiation detection, radiation imaging, radiation protection, radiation shielding, and that's what I do during the day job. But I've always had an eye on crypto. Long ago, I looked at Bitcoin as it first started, and I was an idiot. I didn't get involved with it. I was like, this doesn't seem like it's going to go anywhere. It's probably just going to collapse. A few years after that, I realized that wasn't going to happen. And so I set up a Litecoin miner and started mining some Litecoin on my own. But I knew that, man, this isn't quite what it should be. It uses energy. I'm an energy guy. This is, it's not going to be good long term. And it's certainly not got all of the features and functionality that's really going to take this thing to the next level. I mean, yeah, Litecoin's a little faster than Bitcoin, has a little bit different utility, but it's still a first generation blockchain. And so after mining on that GPUs, Litecoin became just totally untenable and unprofitable after the ASIC miners hit. I just, threw that cold wallet aside on an archive drive and forgot about it for a bunch of years. I went back, I pursued my dissertation work, worked for a few more years until the blockchain space started to really heat up. And that's when I started deciding, okay, I'll pay attention to this a little more, don't have quite as much going on. And I follow Lex Fridman podcast. Lex Fridman, awesome dude. Really enjoy the love he's trying to put into the world. And he had Charles on. And so Charles, it didn't take but 5 minutes of me watching that interview before I was like, okay, I'm gonna binge this whole episode right now. And the principles, the goals, the ethics, the vision, yeah, I was sold right then and there. Before I even got done with the end of the podcast there, I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to sync my Litecoin wallet up and send it to an exchange, and we're switching to Cardano. This is Litecoin's done. It's first gen. We're going third gen. Not looking back. And then in that interview, something else like really caught me. Charles talked about how he talked about 3 huge motivators for why he was doing what he's doing. And one of them was the woman and her husband, the server at the restaurant, and the police had stopped her husband and literally just taken all his cash. Bye-bye. We're stealing it. Can't do anything about it. And that really hit me because I know in my life 2 people that have had very similar things happen. One of them, the federal government came in, drained every account, took every asset, leaned everything, left them with like nothing, didn't even charge, no proceedings yet, putting him in such a tough position that he can't even like write a check to his lawyer, just to squeeze and apply pressure. Because obviously, let's take everything. He's guilty, right? Guilty before proven innocent. Take everything. Not even allow him to be able to write a check to his lawyer, and then drag it out and wait for a plea.
Yeah.
Not a court date. Not a jury of peers. A plea. And that's that kind of like guilty until proven innocent. That's tough. And then another personal friend I have, this is years later, he tells me all of a sudden he woke up one day and he had an email. Well, first of all, he looked at his bank account, zero. All of his bank accounts just zeroed. And he was like, okay, what the hell? He went to his inbox and saw an email notification from his bank saying, you've been zeroed.
Your assets are seized.
So he called the bank and asked, why have I been zeroed? And then he was told, oh, our internal systems are telling us that the California Tax Franchise Board has taken all your money, zeroed all your accounts. And so then he had to go and get a lawyer and start a long process just to get his money back. And the kicker is, he never lived in California. He'd never been a California resident. He'd never owned a business in California. He'd never done anything in California that would result in any necessary taxes to the state of California. Zeroed.
They just confiscated his stuff because somebody reported something.
And that is the same, whether it's federal agents trying to make a career for themselves, California Tax Board, or that police officer that took cash from, Charles Server's husband. Same thing. It happened in a first world nation, no due process, strikes at the heart of, fiscal, custodial sense of what money is and what it's supposed to be. And so I was like, all right, Cardano, I'm in.
Yeah. I feel for your background story. Similar happened to my dad with the IRS. Someone filed fraudulent information with the IRS, and it was just a pain. It took years to get it sorted. And he's like, hey, this is not accurate. And they said, see us in court. Okay. The average working guy
first and just zero the account immediately.
I don't know the bloody details because I was young, but I know they came to our house.
Yeah.
I know the people in suits came to our house. And
probably before the internet. Nowadays, they don't bother coming to your house. They'll just zero your bank account.
Painful. Yeah, it was painful. It was painful. So, all right. So you are a math guy. You've got a math. You're an engineer and dealing with nuclear. So you got your hands in math, your head in math. You kind of get how that works, right?
Data analytics. I bought into Cardano. I was like, man, I've got this background in computing and high performance computing. I'm going to do a stake pool for sure. Like, no problem. I was compiling Gen 2 kernels back in like 2002. I ran large clusters. I could easily set up a stake pool. So I looked at it and looked at the math of what does it take to make a block every epoch. And I was like, ooh, 1 million. Ow, I don't got 1 million. And if I did have 1 million, what would the yield be? Ooh, three high threes, maybe low fours. That's not competitive. That's not a competitive yield. Ooh, I can't even, I have the technical capability to spool up a node, but I'm too much of a newcomer to Cardano to have gotten in early enough to build up that much stake. I'm a relative newcomer. I came into this, last fall. I'm new.
Yeah, after seeing it on Lex Friedman podcast, which is freaking great.
Yep.
So you went to spin up a stake pool and you found that it's a really hard barrier to entry to get the delegation or purchase the ADA based on the price of ADA whenever you try to get some.
Yep.
And so you went to work on the math. What's going on, right?
Yep. So I started realizing what it was going to take to actually do that. And, for the most part, I kind of just let that simmer. I found a few stake pools I was going to delegate to. I didn't know what was going on. I delegated to a multi-pool that had been with the community all the way back to the beginning, had a reasonable amount of pledge, and was like, okay, I feel good about this, these people were there at ITN supporting the network and are still with the network and are going to be with the network. No problems. Awesome. I'll stick with them. And then as I got more into Cardano Twitter, I started seeing multi-pools are bad. Single pools are good. Multi-pools are bad. Multi-pools are not centralizing. Yeah. Single pools are decentralizing.
And that debate will go on forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the everlasting forever debate.
Yeah. But I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer. I'm a data analytics guy. I looked at this and I said, okay, I don't buy this decentralized, centralized, decentralized argument. What's the number? What is the number for decentralization? And that's when I started looking at the parameters. That there was this intent that one of the parameters was going to guide how much the network kind of spread out to a certain number of nodes, ideally, in the paper. And the other one was going to define kind of the advantage of what pledge is supposed to be about. And so I came into K equals 500 and I started looking at it and I was like, this doesn't look like 500 yet. This doesn't look close to it, but what is the number? And so when I dug up the formula and I figured out how K was supposed to be applied, I was like, okay, I can use a weighted combination of exactly how stake is distributed right now to figure out and answer the question. If we perfectly distributed stake evenly, just as the paper describes, the original paper describes, how many pools would there be on average? Would it be 100? Would it be 200? Would it be close to 500? Would it be more than 500? So I went to Ada Pools and clicked on groups and pulled the whole spreadsheet of all of the pools and all of the groups, and put it in a spreadsheet and started doing a weighted fraction combination of everything there.
Because it's math, right? It's math is math.
And so, math. I went through it, and I've got this on the second screen here. I sorted it.
Okay.
I realized.
You want me to pull that up?
Sure. I realized.
You want me to pull that up?
Yeah, pull it up. I realized there's a single pool operators group that's really not one group. It's really a lot of groups, which is awesome. And then there's these groups and exchanges and multi-pools that have a lot of pools, but in the eyes of decentralization, they're really only one group. I can't give Binance decentralization credit any more than just being one group and entity. So I figured out what every single group's fraction of the network was, which is their weight, and what their individual K per pool would be. In this example, if Binance entities were the only ones on the network, there would be 12.5% of the network Binances that would make up the entire network. K effective would be 8. If it was only Binance that had a vote on how distributed the network was going to be. But they're not the only one. There's a bunch of other pools here. There's tons of pools that have about 1% of all stake. And if they had their vote, K effective would be about 100. And so then I was also curious, what do I call this darn thing? There's a difference between K parameter and I didn't want to call it decentralization factor because there's also the Nakamoto coefficient, which ironically is about half of the effective decentralization parameter here. In nuclear engineering, we have this term to describe whether a nuclear reactor is increasing in neutron population and power, stable, or decreasing in neutron population and power. And that's called the K effective. K describing whether more neutrons are being produced, whether the neutron level in the reactor is at perfect steady state, K equals 1, or whether there's less and less neutrons in the reactor, K is less than 1. So as a nuclear guy, I was like, well, I'm going to name this like K effective after the nuclear reactor, reactivity parameter, K effective. Why not? And to my surprise, dragged it out. K effective was in around the 40s. And that was a shocker. I felt like I did my math wrong. So I double checked it and double checked it and double checked it and deleted the table and put in just like 1 or 2 entries that each had 500 groups with 1/500th of the network. And sure enough, it came out the K effective of 500. So I was like, all right, the numbers are right. It's pretty simple. Every group gets a vote on what its K effective is, weighted by its weight of the network, which is just the group stake over the total stake. And the individual vote is the group stake over the total stake. So it just reduces down to the square of the group stake over the total stake, summed up for every single group on Cardano. And notice I'm calling it group. I'm not calling it pool. Binance is one group. Adalite is one group. One PCT is one group. This unknown whale is one group.
There's a new one that came on. There was 1.6 billion joined the network earlier this week.
Yep, that's a Coinbase.
You saw that?
It's wonderful that they're joining. Love having them. Love having
the stake on the network.
Love having Adalite. You know, I'm coming at this as a scientist, as an engineer. Like I'm not against anybody. I think it's great when more people are getting into Cardano and spreading it. I'm just going to figure out what the number actually is. And when I started seeing it be at 40, that really made me question things. It's like, okay, why? Why did it go from 150 to 500 in K parameter, but then the network decentralization is not? And then I talked with Cardano Blockchain Insights, and they sent me some historical data. So instead of just having a snapshot of what K effective was right then and there at that epoch, or epoch, they gave me this data dump in a text file. So I wrote some Python that went through and parsed their whole data dump and structured it and did the weighted fractions of every group of every epoch and figured out a K effective per epoch. And then I made a chart of that.
Yeah.
And that's when I was surprised again.
So we can go to that chart. We'll make sure we speak to it verbosely because before the podcast, Michael and I spoke last week, and the way he explained this, it's really good. I mean, it makes sense because in my observations of K, and this is just an example, and it kind of relates to your K effective, like when K was set to 150, it allowed, it didn't allow about 600 to 800 pools formed at 150. Then K was moved to 500. And that formed effectively kind of 1,000 pools, even though there's 3,000 total running because people were always, trying to spin it up and see if they can make it work. But about 1,000 effective block producers. And so you ran the spreadsheets. Did you want to touch on that? And I'll put the screen share back up and you could go more into the math. All right, we'll just speak to it verbosely. And I want to let the viewers know, if you have questions, check out the numbers and listen to what Michael's explaining to us here. And then if you have questions, ask us in the chat while he's here, because it'll just help everybody understand stuff better. So, and he's a professor, so he's probably pretty good at it. So, all right, Michael, what you got?
Sure. So from the Cardano Blockchain Insights data dump, I computed a K effective per every epoch historically back until it seemed reasonable. And that gave me this chart. And I realized that the decentralization of the network improved up to a point, up to a time, but then it became range bound. On average, and I put this in the CIP proposal. It's a draft. I'm still working on it. I'm still adding to it. I'm still refining ideas. I'm trying to make it and communicate better. The Cardano network will do about 21,600 blocks. And there's 2,400 groups of block producers. And if it was perfectly average, then there would be about 41 groups, each producing about 527 blocks per epoch. Now, that's not actually the way it is. It's not an average. It's got some extreme tails. You've got people like the exchanges that might be producing 3,500 blocks per epoch. And then you've got the small pool that is rolling the dice as to whether they produce one block that epoch or not. But in the spirit of what K was defined to be from the paper, the average of the block production of the network, that's how I decided to compute it. And so I started seeing there's a difference between the input parameter of 500 and the output result of, on average, where the block's being made. How centralized is block production? When I saw this chart, that led me to my next uncomfortable realization that Cardano is wonderfully decentralized. About half of this puts us at a Nakamoto coefficient in the low 20s, which is awesome. It's better than pretty much every other large blockchain there is. So we have solid, stable, effective decentralization of our network. But it's not growing on its own over time or organically improving over time. It's kind of gotten into
It may not be optimal.
Not be.
I mean, it may not be optimal. It's really good, but it still has room for improvement.
Because supposedly this K parameter is supposed to be 500.
Yeah. And just a quick
40.
Yeah. And a quick review for anybody who's recently dialed in, the K parameter sets the saturation point of the pool so that a pool cannot become infinitely large and everything consolidates into one pool because the rewards are maximized. And the A naught parameter prevents you from it makes pledge work a little bit so that you don't have an infinite number of pools to where the network collapses under its own weight. And that's where Michael's math comes into play to help kind of refine what is K effective and how do you bring it back closer towards K. Okay, so what else you got on this, Michael?
I'm going to go ahead and expound on exactly what you said using the words of IOG's chief scientist in the blog post and in the paper to communicate that. This mechanism provides the right set of constraints for the system to converge to a configuration of K equal size pools with a maximum amount of pledge possible. So as I was doing my background research and I saw what K effective in my calculation was, I wanted to start understanding what is this current reward formula doing? How is it working? Why is it doing this? It's supposed to use K and A naught to achieve a certain goal. And there was a disconnect between 500 and 41. And I was just trying to understand why. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it's trying to saturate 500 pools to optimize rewards, but that's not happening.
With the pledge distributed too.
Yeah.
Because A naught is supposed to incentivize that. Which we see that here and here. But I couldn't fully wrap my head around this. I wondered, what is all the consequences of the reward equation? Well, I'm a data guy. I'm an engineer. So guess what? I opened up a large spreadsheet and started to plot it out.
This is really cool.
And this is it. For every pledge amount, pledging 1%, and I do this in terms of stake saturation because the total stake of a saturated pool changes a little bit every epoch. And if K is changed, the saturation point changes. So by putting it in terms of stake saturation, if K is adjusted, if the supply is adjusted, this scales. So it's invariant to those things. So I plotted out what happens, what does it look like if you put 0% pledge in? What's the average yield as a function of stake? And we can clearly see that at K equals 500, at the 100% stake saturation, there are diminishing yields. Cool.
Okay.
That works.
Can you give a brief description of that band for the Spotify and iHeart listeners?
Yeah, I'm going to get there.
Oh, that's where we're going. Thank you.
And then at the beginning, I saw this slope, and I was like, this is why it was so hard for me to even dream of spooling up a stake pool. Because I would need 10% of 68 million just to get to that 4% level. I would need 6 million stake just to get above, on average, 4% to start being competitive. This is why I couldn't get my hands on 1 million, 5 million to easily sustainably run a stake pool because of the shape of this curve coming in. And then I started to see something else. There's this striation, there's this banding, there's this pledge incentive. As you put more pledge in, your rewards increase.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what it really is doing is there's rewards, and it starts out everybody at less rewards. 1 over 1 plus A naught. So when I started looking at this, I started realizing, okay, the best thing to do is for me to be a financial asset manager and collect custodial money and start up a hedge fund or a financial firm where I put in 65 million pledged and get more than 5% yield. That clearly is the spot to be in the yield curve.
Yeah,
But
that's
it's not
the green.
individuals.
Is that the
It's
green
not
apex?
decentralized. It's not individual custody. So if you want more yields, put in more pledge.
So that's that
what's
green
incentivized.
apex at 95%.
Yep. And or 100% pledge. So what does that mean? Well, that means that so many of the rest of the people in the community with only 0.5%, 1%, 2%, 5% pledge, the rest of the community is stuck on this line down here, all the way to here. Most of the big multi-pools will operate on this asymptotic line here at the bottom between 0% pledge and maybe 5% pledge. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? This really is it, but what does that mean? And then I started just doing some looking. Okay, there's people pledging a lot. Okay, there are whales, 100% pledge, 100% private. I can't delegate to these. And then there's a bunch of them pledging a lot, which is great. We want that. That helps the network. And then there's this gap between 60 million-ish pledged and Eden Pool, which is pledged 10 million.
Yeah, which is hard to come by.
That's hard to come by. That means that along here, there is nobody in this area. There's a few people concentrated up here pledging mostly the entire pool, and then everybody else is stacked down here along the bottom. That's it. Those are the two groups. 60 million or 1 million pledge. And it continues. Then you've got pools that each have 1, 2 million pledged, which is awesome. But there's that divide. So I realized, okay, this incentive, it is doing something. And then I wondered, okay, my computations here say that somebody should be getting 5.5% yield. Is it really happening? So pull open the yield, look at expected mint of 60 blocks per. Take, on an average block production epoch, 48,000 ADA, and then you multiply that by 72. Then you divide it out by 6.43 million, times it by 100, and lo and behold, 5.4 something percent.
Math checks out.
It is just the math of the system. So I'm like, okay, that's what's going on here. There are a group of pools here making, these pools are making 5.5%, 5.4%, 5.3%. It's in the mid fives. Everybody else is at the asymptote of 4.25% currently. And that just didn't quite feel right. I wasn't sure that that's exactly the way I wanted to incentivize. I would have incentivized the network to make that decentralization concept happen. Because over time, what's going to happen, and this is by the way, I'm not criticizing this is a totally valid business model. There are groups and institutions like Wave Financial that will custodially bring money to Cardano and stake it in a pool with all pledge, and their clients will be earning above 5%.
Yeah.
Nothing
And it's a
wrong with
valid
that
business model. And I was anticipating a lot of people would be doing that. It's probably less than what I was anticipating that are actually doing it. I'd like to be able to do it myself.
Yeah, exactly. That's where we want to be. We all want to be up here in this spot, right?
Yeah. So how do we get there?
The
You did some
ideal.
more math, didn't you?
Yeah.
You kind of figured it out.
I started wondering, could we all, is there a way to get there? Should we get there? Should we just increase K? Should we increase A naught? Should we decrease A naught? What should we do?
Should we just argue about it on Twitter for the rest of the day?
There was a call.
No, let's do some math, right?
There was a call where there was a floated proposition that maybe this minimum fee matters, and it should be reduced from 340 to 30. So, okay, I just went in and plugged in 30, and let's look at what the shape looks like. It's not as steep here at the bottom, and should be a lot easier for small pools to get in. Not any statistically more likely to make a block per epoch, but, it's easier to get over 4%.
You kind of took out that really strong curve.
Yep.
And you tamed it back a little.
Yep. So changing the minimum fee will change this part of the reward equation. On average, I know that sometimes you'll produce more blocks and sometimes you'll produce 0, but on average, that doesn't change anything to do with how pledge is used. K is obviously super effective. When K was changed, people would split pools into multi-pools. Done.
Mm-hmm.
Super effective.
Plus the price of ADA went up and more people spun up pools with less pledge. So both happened. There's many different things happened that caused... I go with K times 6. When K was 150, it was almost 800. But what was it? It was about 6 to 800, K times 6. And then when K 500, there's about 3,000 pools, K times 6. That's because something in the formula wasn't strong enough.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
And then I said, okay, well, what happens if this minimum fee, we dropped it from 340, now it's 30, the shape looks better. What happens if it's 0? That's interesting. It gets flat. That looks maybe more fair, but then maybe too many people would try to open up pools, and with too many pools, it would be hard to propagate network messages across the entire network. There's a trade-off.
We know there's a limited number of nodes. We don't know exactly what that is. My estimate is about 8,000, including relays, approximately, but I don't know. But there's some number. There is a limit. It can't be infinitely larger. It won't work. It'll be too slow.
Awesome work of what IOG is doing. They're going to have pipeline. They're going to have input endorsers. We're going to be scaling through Basho, and so we'll be able to support more nodes and more stake pools across the network, which is awesome. It's exactly what we need to do.
Yeah.
But probably adding 20,000 relays and pools, there will be a point of diminishing returns in terms of network message efficiency. It's just, it would happen. So maybe there should be an on-ramp, maybe not.
Yeah.
That's a good discussion
but there was some discussion about taking K to 750 and 1,000. So that would help with that as well. And that would bring saturation down, and it would be more amicable to pledge distribution, I guess, if you will.
Maybe not, because if I'm wealthy and I'm stacked with pledge, I really don't care what you set K to. I'll just put my pools and pledge it all and sit right here the whole time.
Yeah, or not necessarily stacked with pledge, because there are some operations, again, perfectly valid models, 100% valid, but their pledge is 0 and they use everything as stake. And they'll apply, and 65 million stake, and the pledge is 0. So
that's right.
Why? Because, pledge doesn't really matter. It's really not strong enough, right? It's not enough of incentive.
That's what the network is communicating by having so many saturated pools with 0 pledge. And we just saw another 24 of them spool up totally saturated 0 pledge.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's bad.
Yeah.
In fact, if I wanted to be fair and egalitarian about the rewards, I would like them to be able to achieve about the same rewards as everyone else, even with a lower amount of pledge. But maybe not zero pledge.
Maybe not zero.
But maybe not 100% pledge.
Yeah. Because
remember, there's a great chasm in between people pledging nothing and people pledging the whole lot.
Yeah.
Maybe the original paper said A0 is supposed to result in a situation of K on average pools with a maximum amount of pledge per pool. Clearly, that's not happening. So then I decided, okay, the minimum fee, that's something valid we should look at. Maybe we should look at A0 too. What happens if? What happens if we tweak A0? What happens if we increase it a little bit from 0.3 to 0.5? Ah, the shape is different. That asymptote, instead of being at 4.25% for everybody, everybody makes less. Everybody's going to be in the 3s now, period.
Raising A0 causes rewards to go down, which in my opinion are too low already.
For everyone.
I think it went down.
No,
right now
not
the
for
network
everyone. The whales that are fully pledging, they still get 5.5%. They're fine.
They're still 5.5%. Yep. Your green tick mark at 95% is still in the same spot.
So if I spun up a custodial wealth management company, a blockchain business, I got a CFA buddy of mine in, and we just became, a registered security, and we put pools up. We could do that. 5.5%. Nothing that A0 is going to do is probably going to change that. Let's see.
Yeah, which is fine.
Let's increase it more.
It's good. I anticipated it. It's I thought there would be more, but just to be clear, it's still a good thing.
Everybody's yields would now not be at 4.25%, they'd be at 3.25%.
Okay,
average,
so that's
huge.
In the
community. That's
going from 5 to 7, right? Huge spread. So raising A0 does not look like a good option.
Well, it is an option that's mathematically valid, but what, in my opinion, it will do is it will create 2 classes of stakers within the Cardano community. This parameter, as it's currently implemented, causes a class division.
So what do we end up here? We end with the 5.5% maximum pledge and 3.25%.
So if this starts to happen, if A0 increases, you know what? I, as an individual, I might just take my stake out of a community pool, and I might send it to a perfectly valid business like Wave Financial that would be able to still return 5%.
Yeah. Or that new one that might be Coinbase.
Yep.
Well, they're offering 3.75%. 3.75% is higher than this chart, for example.
Well, yeah, but if the A0 parameter was changed, what they would probably do is they would realize that this is rough. They would follow the leadership of Wave Financial, and they would start pledging a higher fraction in their pools to be able to provide their clients with higher yield. And that's cool, But what's not cool is that the equation and the field of results allows for 2 separate classes to start to imagine. Now, in the original paper, it clearly says that A0 should be reduced in order to make it, they quote, more egalitarian results. So let's go the other way. Let's reduce A0. Yields for most of the community pools with low pledge goes up closer to 5%. The yields of individuals fully pledged doesn't change much. They'll still be at 5.5% in this neighborhood.
Rewards get better.
Rewards would get better. But then there's this argument. Oh, we don't have a pledge incentive to provide Sybil defense. Yes, this decreases this pledge incentive. And then if you decrease A0 all the way to 0, guess what?
Everything's
one line.
Yeah.
So I thought about this, and I went back to this, and I looked at it, and I took a critical look. I said, okay, Sybil behavior, Sybil behavior, Sybil behavior, Sybil behavior, Sybil behavior, Sybil behavior. Well, currently A0 is not providing Sybil defense materially as it is now.
Yeah. Can
None
I
of these
comment on that for a
pools-
second?
What's that?
The-
Sure.
Can I? The definition of civil did kind of shift a little bit, but I understand what
yeah.
you're saying. It would be considered civil because instead of them being incentivized to put as much pledge as possible into one pool, that it's works perfectly fine to not, right, to make more
Yes.
pools. Right? So that's
Zero
I get what you're saying.
pledge.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that there's anything.
So civil
wrong with
original
that.
discussions were like if I were to open 20 different pools under 20 different names, but it's still all controlled by one guy, right? That
Yeah.
was the kind of the original definition. It's kind
Yeah.
of bled over, but I get what
Or
you're
90
saying.
pools controlled by one entity.
Yeah.
You know, that
Yeah.
happens, obviously. Oh, I'm sorry, 62 pools by one
62.
entity.
Yeah.
Or now that that we have a newcomer, a new 24 pools by one entity. We might as well rename Avengers to Coinbase. That's cool.
We think. But it's good. And as long as most people know, because some people might have just joined the video, it's better to have that stake on the network than not, because the stake is
Yes.
providing the security mechanism. It's better to have it. The question that we're looking at here is it optimized, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yep. We have
And how are the
K
parameters working?
for one function in the network, and we have A naught for another. A naught should do something for pledge. And my argument was, when I realized all this, when I did those charts, it just didn't seem like an incentive-based A naught was effective. And
Yeah.
then I started to think, what happens if A naught wasn't an incentive, but it was an enforcement like K?
Yeah. And also, what do you do? Like Hosky chimed in. Hi, Hosky. There's a couple other people over there. The definition of one person spent on multiple pools. But in the case of like my team, for example, we have 3 people. In the case of Binance, there could be some number, we don't know, but there's a large number of people. And so we don't really have that in, we haven't talked about that yet. First, we need to look at the math. So Michael's going to look at the math. So go ahead and tell us more about the math in the context of one entity and number of pools, pledge, and rewards, which is the next part that we'll get to, because you have more graphs and math for us.
I started to then do critical look at what the reality of A naught and K was. Talk about that. And then there was this awesome thing that happened, Sunday swap. Stakes centralized into community pools, and they realized that wasn't a good thing. And then they announced their reverse ISO and stake 1 billion stake spread out to small pools. And that's awesome. I'll scroll up here and just show where the Sunday swap effect was in K.
That's a lot of power too. And people are using free choice. They want those tokens, and so therefore they choose to go where they want to go, and that's cool. That's a good thing.
From here to here, that's the Sunday swap ISO. And this is the reverse ISO. The reverse ISO created the sharpest slope in the change of the effective decentralization of the network since Epoch 245. So, in my take, stake can be very mobile for the right incentives, for the right structure of the reward equation, for the right network.
That was a total shift of 1 billion, roughly, out of the 22 billion stake. So we're looking at about 5% of the stake on the network.
Yeah.
And just keep in mind, there's still 9 billion ADA left unstaked. It'd be good if we can find where's that 9 billion ADA that is not yet staked on the network. And I think we're going to find out in the next couple months where some of that might be.
Eventually.
Yeah.
And I also want to touch on, there is a danger of just increasing K forever and ever and ever, because I don't think it's fair to look at you, Rick, and say, I don't like your multi-pool thing, so I'm going to force K to be 5,000. And then you're going to have to use more processors, more memory, and more nodes than a Solana validator. Well, stick it to you. You're going to have to use near a terabyte of RAM to support all these instances,
because that's what would happen to get all those nodes.
That's not the right answer either. The right answer is for you to be able to operate the most efficient pool for your delegators. And notice I said singular. In my opinion, a lot of people are one group. So you could be maybe 3 groups, maybe 1 group, but it would be nice if you weren't forced to split. Maybe you can choose to keep it together. And that's where the danger of just increasing K comes from. Maybe
And of
K,
note though, when people did split, ADA was like 10 cents, actually 5 to 10 cents when that
yeah,
happened. And there was only 800 pools on the network. So, that's just something of note.
but if
But
the effective decentralization is still only in the 40s and it's not changing, and we want to actually move that, I don't care if you are one group running 1 pool or you are 1 group running 6 pools. To the real definition of decentralization, those are the same thing. And so people want to use K maybe just as a weapon to force hardship on some parts of the community. And I don't think that's fair either.
yeah,
As
depending
a
on who
math
you are,
guy,
you might want it to go up or down depending on how it benefits
yep.
you.
As a
When
math
in
guy,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
what I can do is I can objectively look at this and say K effective is about 41. Maybe we should have K parameter lead that, but not be trying to absurdly exceed it. Maybe the K parameter should be set 2 or 3 times higher than the effective network decentralization. But there obviously isn't any real sense in setting it 10 times, 20 times, or 100 times higher than what we're actually earning in decentralization. That's a disconnect of parameter as an input and decentralization as an output result.
Yeah. And so you ran some more math we talked about last week
Yep.
and found some very simple changes to the formula that will help K achieve what it's intended, the
Help the
desired
network
effect. Help the
achieve
network, yeah.
the words that were originally written in the RSS paper. But I first had to sit down and write out what the principles of this were. Because as Charles says, principles matter. We're all principled people. We are here in this community because of the principles of this community. We're not all here just for mooning and gains. We have other goals. We have other
Yeah.
aspirations.
Can you summarize those for the
Yeah.
listeners on Spotify and iHeart?
The
Everybody in the
principles I
community?
wrote down when I started looking at a new reward equation was I want everybody to be treated fairly, from the individual who just got in to Binance. Binance needs to be treated fairly. Coinbase needs to be treated fairly. You need to be treated fairly. The person who just bought in needs to be treated fairly. Everyone in the community should have the opportunity to, on average, earn the same yield, so that we don't form 2 classes of stakeholders. We don't want to form a class of custodial, large, high yielders and a class of individual, self-custodied, low yielders. I don't think that our community would benefit from having 2 classes of stakeholders over time. And we're starting to see some of that form. I showed the ADA pools results of that's showing that. I just don't want it to continue for 3 years.
We'd like to see a little bit of relief or solution, some options. What can we do? So what do you
Start having
think?
this discussion about what those options
Yeah.
could be. And so then I realized a principle is there should be a clear cause and effect relationship between A0 and K as inputs and what the network is doing as an output. The parameters don't mean anything if the result is not correlated at all. They have to correlate. Inputs should produce results. They can't
Makes
become
sense.
disjointed. And that led me to this principle that's probably the most important one for some of the reward formulation is the A0 parameter must require, not incentivize, it must require pool operators to pledge to support community delegation and civil protection. Because if we don't do that, we might as well just take out pledge. There's no point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You showed me that graph last week, and it looks like it kind of solves that. It meets that principle.
So I'm starting to get there. And then, since this isn't just a propose something and hope, the result should be quantified in terms of the group decentralization of block production, not stake saturation relative to pools. So if we're gonna propose a change, gotta propose a method of measuring with a metric the result objectively, away from anybody's opinions. And the implementation should be smooth, easy, clear, and beneficial for everybody. This goes back to the fair part. This should, if my proposal has any future, it should make your life easier. It should make Binance's life easier. It should make the new guy wanting to spool up his first stake pool with just, a few thousand ADA's life easier. And the new reward equation should be computationally simple and elegant. I went through a few iterations where I had, logarithms and exponents and change of base and geometric relationships. And you can do some awesome curve shapes with all that. It's going to cost the computer some time to process that, in between at snapshots at major points. And so that led me to this, to provide an equal feedback of K, just as it is now, and not use A naught as it was originally intended, but recast A naught as truly, a pledge leverage factor, not create a new factor called leverage, but A naught is supposed to govern pledge as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Let's actually use it that way.
Yeah, and I've heard other people speak of this as well, where saturation is relative to pledge.
Yes, I'm not the first person to come up with this idea.
Yeah.
It's been proposed before. I cite who originally started proposing that idea. Some of the previous proposals called it leverage fractions. Some kept the 1/1 plus A naught term in the equation, which would still violate that principle of having two separate groups of stakeholders. And so by doing this, not having 1/1 plus A naught times a pledge incentive, this requires pledge just like this requires pool size. They're equal weighted now.
Stake in that pool. Yeah.
Yep. And so there's a lot of rationale behind why to recast, but let's look at what it looks like.
So here's the effect of the math.
Yep. Biggest thing I want to point out first, if you would pledge 0, the yield is always 0.
Okay.
That's a
All
concept.
right, that makes sense. If you pledge nothing, then the pool basically won't work.
Yes.
Okay. I'm okay
But
with
if
that.
A naught was used as this leverage factor, you would always be, and I just arbitrarily picked 100. It might not be the optimal value. It might not be the right value. This is a good discussion to have on what would optimal starting parameters be.
Yeah.
Just like it's a good discussion on what should an optimal K parameter be based on the effective network decentralization, not based on a round number that we emotionally feel like would give us a result we want.
Now, what's interesting about this graph, it starts to answer my question. Now, about 3 years ago, Philippe and I, over on the Cardano effect, we would ask the IOG professors, Kayas, Lars Brunez, Duncan Coots, various interactions, and we'd say, what is minimum pledge? Well, because we assumed there would be one, or we tried to figure out if there was. What is minimal pledge? What is optimal pledge? What is the maximum pledge you would need to put in? And the answer was there is none, there is none, there is none. And we're like, what do we do? How does it work? Right? And they explained it. But this kind of gets a little closer to what people were thinking was what I consider common sense. Like, what can the average person afford to put up?
Well,
The average entrepreneur afford to invest?
Require. But if it's used as a leverage fraction, anybody will be able to support a pool quite a significant fraction larger than what they have. There's nothing wrong with that. It basically adds an early diminishing rewards if you just don't have the pledge to support a larger pool. So it's an enforcement, not an incentive. And then I looked at, okay, what would this be if we just wiped out the minimum fee? Well, then we get to this egalitarian ceiling of yields. Well, first of all, I also want to point out that this is on a log scale. Because if you keep this on a linear scale, all the small pools between 0 and 5% get so smushed down to the bottom, you can't even see what their struggle really is. But on a log scale, we can really look at...
But it depends on what you mean by small. Pools of low pledge or pools of low stake?
This is in terms of stake fraction with pledge as a function of that.
Okay.
So a stake fraction of 1% is only 640,000-ish right now. With the redone equation, that pool, if the pledge was there to support it, and in this case, it would require 0.01% saturation to support that. 0.01% pledge would be able to support a 1% stake pool size. And that 1% stake pool size would be able to earn over 5% yields. That's a pretty small... That's basically like, okay, if you put in 6.8 thousand in pledge, times 100 is 680,000. That could, on average, I know that you'll not make a block every epoch.
Assuming you made a block.
Be about 5%.
Okay.
Okay. Now for bigger pools, if you want to pledge, 1% of the pool to be able to have 100% stake fraction all the way up to the K diminishing returns, that would be somebody needing to pledge 680,000 ADA to support a pool size of up to 68 million ADA at this current A0 parameter. Maybe 100 is too restrictive. Maybe it should be 150. Maybe it should be 50. Maybe it should be 77. I don't know what it is yet. That's a good discussion to make, but I just set it to a multiplier of 100 so that everybody can see on a log scale how the diminishing returns would apply early as a function of pledge.
This is where you're looking for
I don't think
feedback.
It would be too crazy for even the largest exchanges like Binance and Coinbase to pledge 1 or 2% in their pools. I actually don't think it would hurt them.
Yeah. So if
it made their operations easier and they were treated fairly and their clients could all earn the same exact yield as everybody else, independent or custodial, exchange or community.
Yeah. So I'm going to put myself in the exchange shoes for a minute, and I can't speak for the exchanges, but I imagine they're doing one of two things, or a number of things. They got to have liquid ADA because people might withdraw it.
Yep.
Okay. So they can't lock all of it. If they did, they would maximize returns. They would maximize rewards if they did.
Yep.
And how do you, here's what I'm thinking. The dastardly part of me says, how do you trust a guy with this operator with like 2 billion ADA? You give the keys to one person to 2 billion ADA, someone's going to kidnap that guy and start cutting fingers off until he hands over the keys. Or he might just run off then on his own.
But that brings up
those are
another unsaid. There's two unsaid things here, and I list it in the sections down here. The yield ceiling makes everything fair, and then the only advantage left built into the system is the small pool advantage. Tie goes to the smaller pool, so suddenly the smaller pools might actually have a small fraction ahead of the larger pools, even if the yield ceiling is the exact same. Tie goes to the smaller pool. Cool. And then, just like what you were saying about those large stakeholders, sometimes called whales, sometimes called exchanges, founders, founding organizations, whoever they are,
or entrepreneurs who collected up,
they only then
thousands of investors.
One motivation left. If they're not motivated by getting to the yield island that's in the higher class at 5% compared to everybody else, if they can hit the same yield ceiling as everybody else, the only thing they can do to increase the value of their holdings is to delegate it around and spread it around the community to actually improve decentralization. Because an actual improvement of decentralization realizes the principles and the goal of Cardano. So right now we have a few large early stakeholders who are perfectly content holding all of their all of their ADA in self-custodied pools, pledged, private, 100% themselves, right? If they couldn't earn any better yield anywhere else and everybody got to the same yield, the only thing that a whale could do to influence that situation and to improve the value of their holdings would be to start splitting it up and dividing it to other pools that they might not control, but might provide better decentralization of the network. Because
They
then,
might get them better returns because that's the whales can be looking at.
yeah, and it's not returns in yield percent, it's returns in the value growth of ADA because the network is getting more decentralized. It's reaching the goal of the blockchain trilemma, real decentralization. So that would be the only motivation left for large holders, would be to start actually spreading it around to ensure the network got more decentralized. Maybe
Yeah.
that happened, maybe not.
So we'd end up with if you in this example, if you set the K to 100, you could optimally end up with 100 pools with optimal pledge and hopefully optimal rewards. I mean, that's what we're trying to look at. If people are acting in their own best self-interest, they're going to say, where can I get the best rewards, or where can I make myself feel the best? Like, what am I most comfortable trusting?
Some people
And
want the
so,
security of an exchange. Some people want a pool that donates to charity. Some people want a pool that's a brand. Some people want a pool that's a location. I just want to make sure that none of those people are capped at a lower yield than some other group of people just because. And
yeah.
this is one of my personal motivations. I would love to see this K effective decentralization number go to 100. And I would love the K parameter to be about 2 times whatever the effective network decentralization actually is at any given time.
So if we
I don't
set,
think we should just keep increasing K forever and ever and ever, like that's actually going to be a good thing. I
yeah,
think it should lead the real decentralization of the network, but not leave it behind.
not follow it. Yeah. And one of the original concepts behind K was the K parameter would be increased as the price of ADA increases up to some point to where you've reached a maximum number of nodes, which is not known, but it's probably somewhere in the couple thousand, several thousand nodes. So what does this do for rewards? I don't want to jump ahead. Are you good with
No, I was talking
can you
about rewards already. It gets them
so
flat and fair forever.
yeah. So because that's right now, that's currently kind of important because the typical average right now is in the 4% zone. The network average, if you look on Cardano Blockchain Insights,
Mhm.
which is one of the graphs you're familiar with,
Yep.
the rewards network average is only 1.6% because they do the actual average. There are people earning 0%. So if you're
Mhm.
averaging the 0% with the 5.5% and the typically 4%, then you get 1.5%. What does this one do? What was the I thought, you know how that apogee where the green line is at 95% and it kind
Mhm.
of like brings everybody else up a little bit so that they're getting better rewards.
By getting rid of the
That's
1
this one,
over
right?
1 plus A naught term,
Yeah.
um, that term is the incentive that is sacrificing the fair egalitarian rewards as described by the original stake pool sharing paper. The stake pool sharing paper does reference that there is an egalitarian fair ceiling reward out there. And that basically is just R times some function of network size and network pledge protection, but not diminishing this, not reducing this for one group of people and leaving the coins in the reserve to be paid out slightly more to some other group of people later.
Okay.
That's an important
So
concept too. If this plays out over time, a group like Wave Financial or IOG or that unnamed large stakeholder will be accumulating 30% more of the reserves paid out over time, proportional
Okay.
to stake. Is that fair?
I think it's a little bit closer to fair, as in you're putting more skin in the game, so the rewards are a little bit better. Am I following you correctly? You know what I'm saying? So their pledge allows them to put in more stake because it raises the ceiling up to a
Sure.
point. Up to a point.
The way it is now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't let the small individual guy
Yeah.
get his same fraction of the reserve payout over time.
All right. So let me give you a scenario and let's see how that works.
Sure.
I'm an entrepreneur and I take out
Yep.
a small business loan.
Yep.
And I got three options. I can open a Taco Bell franchise and I'll
Yep.
be in the red for a couple of years. I can buy a semi tractor trailer and deliver for UPS as an independent operator.
Mhm.
Or I can invest that $100,000 in ADA today and get almost 100,000 ADA pledge. Let's say it's $1, right? And
Yep.
and make about the same for my investment, maybe, because crypto is very volatile. Crypto is higher
Yep.
risk. Driving a truck's hard work. Okay. So I had these three options to invest. So I invest 100,000 in ADA. I spin up this pool,
Yep.
100,000 pledge, right? Locked in. Okay.
Yep. That
If
means
I
that
set
you would be able to attract community delegation of 10 million
10 million, there you go.
at
Okay.
this
So,
parameter of A naught equals 100.
all right. So with A naught equals 100, and then I can make, if I were able to attract 10 million,
Mhm.
then I could make almost 10 blocks per epoch,
Mhm.
and I might be doing okay. I mean, that's not bad.
And not
It
just
makes
that,
sense. I'd say
you
it passes the sniff test.
you would then be able to set what you needed as a margin. Maybe you want it to be 0% to grow your
Right.
delegation. Maybe you want it
But
to be
but
3%.
if I'm a
You would
small
get to set
business
that.
entrepreneur and I took out a loan of $100,000 in order to set up my business, be it a taco stand, a food
Yep.
truck, a delivery truck, or a steak pool, I got to pay back on that loan.
Yep. So
So
you need
now
a
I got,
non-zero margin.
yeah, plus there's operating costs. So you got between your own personal time expenditures,
Yep.
the loan you took out, your operating costs, you're going to need something,
But you
right?
know what's awesome? That if you put in a 100K pledge with this equation and everybody was getting 5 and change percent and you were earning your 3% margin on that, and that was a verifiable cash flow, and you started to grow closer to actually having a saturated amount of delegates based on pledge, it wouldn't really be a hard business case to go back to the bank or the lender and say, hey, I now have 9 million in community delegation. Can I take out an extra loan for another 200, 500K so that I can pledge more and I can keep growing this business size? Because that's a hard number on the blockchain of how many people have put their stake in your business, in essence. Very justifiable. And it's not just a theory. There are people like Wave Financial doing this custodially, not just don't trust me, but stake with me, but trust me with all of your coins and stake with me.
Right. But those organizations are certified to do that. So
That's right.
that's a good thing. In my opinion, that's a good thing. But one thing that doesn't fit in my profile is I've tried this. If I tried to go to a bank and get a loan for a crypto industry business, they would tell me to leave. They'd say no. Maybe Blue Vine would let me do it. Maybe there's a
Hey,
couple out there that would let me do it, but
think a
a
little bit
large
bigger.
number of banks would say no.
Think a little
Get
bigger.
out of here.
You've got a community here. You've got a lot of people listening. One of
Yeah.
those people might have a few million ADA, and you can create a business relationship if that person reaches out to you and says, hey, Rick, I see you might need more pledge to grow your pool size beyond the hundreds of millions that are already there. You've got a solid brand, you've got a solid business model, you just need more pledge. I will give you that in order for a share of the margin you're earning off of that.
Yeah.
That
And,
would be a perfectly valid business. And that's all done with ADA, no US
yeah,
dollars, no fiat currency.
those conversations have come up. Some people have successfully done that. They have. Some are professional businesses, and some whales, large holders, they won't do that because they want their ADA to be liquid, because they're going to make more money off playing the pump and dump game than they're going to make off of staking. And that is a reality. I mean, I know it for a fact. Someone with large bags, you see him on
That's beyond
Twitter all
me.
the time. I know it's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But I like the outcome of the rewards of this model. I hope
want
it
a
would actually,
fair reward
yeah,
equation that gets the principles aligned for everyone of every size and every model to be fair. And
yeah.
I can't solve the human gambling nature. Even Warren Buffett says I can't do anything about the
Yeah.
gamblers. Like,
People are going to act in their own best interest. They're going to say, hey, can I get away with this? And they're going to try it. Right. So I would like to let the viewers know, just remind anyone who's new here, we got 26 folks here now. If you have questions, please ask us over in the chat. We will check it out. I'm going to touch on a few questions, and I'm going to ask Dr. Liesenfelt, Michael, he goes by Michael. And if I liked the rewards outcome of the model you came up with. Here's why I like the rewards outcome. It improves the rewards for everyone, which is a good thing because it motivates people to stake on the network. My own personal concern is that the average network rewards have dropped faster than I expected. My expectations were to stay up closer to 5% a little longer, but now it's definitely in the 4% zone,
yep.
and the average is much lower. We had a few. I've had a few of the community folks here. Marcel chimed in. Marcel said the staking vault will fix that. We were talking about earlier. Thank you, Marcel. It's now called Eternal. So if you use CC Vault, you'll notice your plugin is updated to Eternal.
I love that wallet. I love it.
It's freaking awesome. It is absolutely awesome. Thank you, Marcel.
But I want to throw in
and
something,
Ola, for all your
on
hard work.
that staking vault that can enable a whale to then decide, I got 500 million ADA. Now I can split it up 500 ways, 1 million to 500 different pools, and materially affect decentralization. That wallet tool can enable a whale, a large holder, to do that. And that's something new, and that's something awesome. And
it can.
I got to also look at this question here. Pineapple on pizza.
Which one? Where's pineapple on pizza?
This is an important question. Pineapple on pizza. For me personally, I am intolerant to citrus, so I can't physically do it. Sorry.
Oh, I'm okay with pineapple on pizza. Other people, I won't eat it. I do have a pineapple tattoo on my leg.
But yeah,
but I don't have
maybe
pineapple
I'll
on
get back to leave the fun and go back to something serious.
Okay.
Coinbase isn't being treated fairly. They're a newcomer. They come to this network. They can only offer their clients 3.75%. They need to make their 0.5%. They're taking 4.25%, taking their 0.5% off it, which is in essence a 13% margin, 12% margin, and offering 3.75% to their clients. I would love for Coinbase to support a proposal like this so that they can offer their clients maybe 5%. I would love for Binance to be able to do that too. I don't want Coinbase to have to worry about K being forced to 1,000 so that then they have to spool up another 23 nodes and take their 30 million ADA wallets and then divide them out. They're already ready for that, by the way. But
yes,
why make
you notice that
all that processor and memory? What I want to do is I want to start with groups like Binance and Coinbase. I would like their support. I want to make their network operations easier. I want their clientele, which represents a majority of the stake in the network, to be treated fairly in yield. And I want them to be stuck at 4% or 3.75%. I want them to get to the same as everybody else. Ideally.
Yeah, which is in this one, like in the example you have on the screen, where based on how much a person pledges, if I take that red line on the left-hand side, and I saturate my pool, let's use the yellow line, and I saturate my pool
to color. The pineapple color line.
Yeah, the pineapple colored line. So on the pineapple colored line, I like how it's next to the green one, like, okay, on the leaves of pineapple. So if I can pledge a pool up to, that's going to be 0.2%.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then A naught equals 100 in this example,
Yep.
using this version of A naught. So not to confuse people, it's a
Yep.
different flavor of A naught.
It's a
That
recast.
person would be, they would be able to pledge a pool up to
0.2%.
2 million before they hit saturation.
You want to probably pick this line up here,
That's a better one.
0.05%.
Yeah.
Allows you
Let's
to
do
get
that
to
one.
a 5% pool.
There you
here.
go. Okay, so 0.05%. How high does that let your stake go before your pool is saturated?
This would be a 5% pool, so that's around 300 something thousand ADA.
Okay, as pledge?
Wait, I'm sorry. No, I'm wrong. That number is not high enough.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was trying
No,
to.
that's okay. And I don't mind being wrong sometimes. That's why I have this as a draft so that it can be revised and fixed and worked on. Okay.
Yeah, folks, check out the link down below. Hop on over to let them know.
Okay, you'll be able to support a pool up to 5% saturation. So 5% of 68 million is 5 times 680,000, which puts you near over 3 million in
to
stake.
Pledge.
To support.
Stake.
That pledge would be able to support that.
Okay. So pledge then becomes scalar. If someone can pledge 1 million, their saturation point becomes 100 million.
That's right. But right now, K
if
limit.
Someone's pledging, then the K limit kicks in before they get there.
And then that's another discussion on, is that K limit at 68 million, is that reasonable for how the network is actually decentralized or not? So it's, but in this proposal, have the rationale and the metrics to measure the result, to guide and inform how to change these things.
Yeah. And, we've been going quite a long time now, so we can wrap up in a little bit. I'll check to see if there's any other questions from the viewers, and we'll talk offline, like run some scenarios through and say, if a person were to do this and invest this much into building a stake pool, what would be the outcome and how would it affect, what numbers would you need to do? Because this is some interesting stuff. There's a lot of people who are interested in it.
At A0 100 right now, you wouldn't have enough pledge to support your whole community delegation.
Let me see, where would I be at? I'd have 50, A0 at 100, and that would be 250, so 1.5 million, 150 million. That would support up to 150 million.
That's right.
Using this chart. Yeah, so my pledge would cover 150 million in delegations. Yeah,
that's right.
So good point. Yeah, we were looking at that earlier, and that's about what it would be. But hopefully
that doesn't mean
the price of ADA would go up so much I wouldn't care.
Well, yeah, or there might be, like you said earlier, there might be perfectly valid business cases where you would, in essence, borrow 1 million or 2 ADA from somebody else, pledge it, increase the amount you can support, and then cut that benefactor, that business relation, into the fraction of the margin. That's a perfectly valid business model.
It is. Or I would go talk to my whale buddies and say, hey,
that's right.
You want to pledge with me?
But you know what that does?
Pledge it up, bros.
What's that doing? That's getting more pledges to more people.
Yeah. I asked about this at a SPO call about a year ago. I asked some IOG folks. Now, what is said and who says what in a SPO call is you don't attribute exactly who said what to what, because it's soft information that's still being refined, right? And I asked, do you, if you want more pledge on the network, can you allow us a better way to make owner keys? And I'm sure some clever people have figured this out. To make the owner keys for other people, so Whale can make an owner key that I can put on my pool and raise my pledge on my pool with somebody else without me having to take custody of their ADA, right? And the answer was no, we don't want people doing that. Okay. And they would rather a relationship of trust be established and a written contract. This is what I was told in general, not quoting somebody word for word. They would want the SPOs to establish greater trust with the financial institution or the supplier of the ADA using written contracts and then taking custody of the ADA. That was the response.
That's exactly what Wave Financial's doing. That's exactly what Binance does. That's exactly what Coinbase does. They have KYC. They have AML. They know
the difference is with Binance, though, it's just other people's ADA because they're an exchange. So Wave and Binance are not the same. They are not the same.
But relative to the network,
definitely not the same. But there's another example we'll talk about. So we'll have a think on this. We'll talk some more. Maybe do another podcast. The other one is stake pools of service. Another perfectly valid business model. There are people who are very good at it. They are providing other people the opportunity to put up stake pools who otherwise wouldn't be able to do it, but they have the financial means or whatever the backing to do it, right? And so there's pushback on that business model, although it is a perfectly valid model. Some people really don't want more people doing a SPOS operator because then one person is holding the secret keys. So that's kind of missing from the beginning of this conversation is how do you divide these groups up? Like, for example, my team, we have 3 people running 6 pools. Is that the same as one guy running 2 pools? Is that the same as one anonymous guy running 2 different pools anonymously with different name brands? Or is that the same thing? Or is it the same as you have these other very large pools that have thousands of investors, one guy taking care of business, and they have a lot of money and a lot of pledge on the network, right? So they don't all count as one person, one pool. It just, it's a little too simple, but I think it needs more discussion.
If all your nice stake pools are stacked up on blades next to each other in the same rack, on the same power, on the same fiber optic feed, in the same data center at the same place in Virginia, like all of like Binance's pools, for example, how decentralized is 62 Binance pools in the one data center in, Eastern Virginia, next to Amazon, next to Equinox, next to everybody else? It's like,
that's not good.
That's not decentralized.
Or Hetzner in Germany. That's really popular.
So, think of decentralization in the context of a pair of scissors cutting fibers or wires. How many wires do you have to cut before you start, losing a lot? That's a good measure of decentralization.
It's a lot.
Too. More beyond just the owners and the financial interest in the keys there.
Then what happens when we introduce Starlink, where we're not there yet. We're almost there. And I know a couple guys are experimenting with Starlink, and there's a little bit more needs to be done. But I think it'll be there. I think Starlink will be there in the next couple of years to where people can actually reasonably run stake pools on it. And what if it's one guy running 50 nodes across the world and they're all connected to Starlink? How does that affect decentralization? I don't know. But more to talk about. I don't see any questions.
I don't want them to be burdened by an equation where they can't get a fair and equal reward to at least try out the business model and see if it works in a free market. I don't want the market to bias against them. I want them to give it a shot with the same level, fair playing field as everybody else and see what happens.
Yeah. And I also want people to continue to discuss these kind of things because it's important. We might find a super optimal formula because Cardano is built in layers, and it's not very difficult for your formula to be implemented. It's a couple lines of math.
Yeah.
Whereas the Cardano node is a whole bunch of other stuff, but the part of the math is not a whole lot.
One line.
Yeah.
So to answer Marcel's question, yes. If ANOT was 100.00, 35K pledge would be able to support a community of up to 3.5 million without diminishing returns in this context.
Yeah. That actually, I like how Marcel does that. He's really good with math. So the 35K pledge would get you 3.5. That kind of starts to pass the sniff test, because that'll get you block and a half, 2 blocks per epoch. Your investment at $1 ADA, your investment is $35,000. And you're looking at making, you could pay that back. Maybe.
It's not unreasonable.
It's on the edge. It's not unreasonable. We would have to look at it closer. I'm not going to do it off the cuff.
I don't know what the optimal A naught is. Also,
Yeah.
another big question I've had, now that we're getting to the very end of this, in reading the original RSS stake pool paper, they present one equation, they go through one analysis and one set of cases to prove it out, right? As an engineer, I want to know, how many equations were there originally? Were there 5 equations? Were they all tested? What were the results of each of them? How many different variations were even thought of and tried? I would love to see or have a paper that was the preceding paper to the one equation that was shown. Like, I want to see the comparative analysis of the 5 different brainstorm ideas and show why was this one, right? As I scroll through pages and pages, why was this one selected? How many others were there? Why was this one comparatively best? I don't know what the other options were. I haven't been in the community long enough to know, or have been around when those thoughts were even being had. So if somebody can educate me on how many reward equations were tested in the framework that this one was tested in the original RSS paper, that'd be great. Educate me.
Yeah. It could be Lars Brunez, possibly, and Agelos Kias, and it'd be great to have a conversation with them and get their insights on that as well. And it's not so much what was done then, but what can we do to improve it going forward. We do know, we talked about it last week, we do know that when they ran the current formula, just so people know, you can have pretty good confidence in the work IOG does, because they did run hundreds of thousands of permutations of the current formulas to find it. They don't just pull a rabbit out of the hat. They do run models that run hundreds of thousands of
variations
variations
on this. How many variations of this were there? So if they ran 100,000 on this, I would just love to see the other 100,000 they ran on the other 4 or 5 equations. That'd be great.
Yeah. You're referring to a different equation that we don't know what that other equation is. What were the other options?
The original paper just gets to this equation, says this is what it is, and it goes through the discourse on it. As a reviewer, I would say, hey, you need to include a section of the comparative analysis of how you derive this one as being competitively advantageous to all the other ones. Because here I just came up with something very simple and basic. Other people have too. How does this?
Like Sean McMurdo's curve. Sean did the curved pledge benefit, and I think you've seen that one. We were talking about.
How does that one compare? Tobias Francie has his own CIP he's authoring that takes a similar form but uses pledge leverage with a bit of a benefit. How would that one compare? It's really tough when somebody says, here's one equation, we analyzed it. I always kind of wonder, what were all the other ones that were tried? Were any other ones tried?
Yeah. Now we have 4 options to compare. We have the original research by IOG. Again, shout out to IOG, massive research, right? And we have the one Sean made, yours, which is interesting, a different angle. We also have now we have Tobias. I got to check out Tobias. I did not know he had a formula out there, and it would be interesting. It is a huge change. It is it's a small formula, but the effects are massive. So it will require more discussion and more thought. And we encourage everybody to go check out that link down below and leave your comments and see if you can run some math. Like UMed ran some cool math on the previous one. He made spreadsheets that let you adjust the A naught and the K parameters and other parameters. There's a lot of other parameters in there. And that was pretty cool. And you have one as well. You got a spreadsheet you ran some data on.
We just need to really talk about it as a community. I don't want this to be a situation where we just say, hey, IOG should do this because unilaterally. We're starting to get close to Voltaire. We're in Basho. We want community consensus around this. And that's why I say, first and foremost, I would like the support of Binance and Coinbase first. I want the community support first. I want the peer review first, then engage with maybe implementation. That's the important path.
Yep. This is not being offered as a solution. This is being offered as a draft. So most importantly, while we wrap up here, and Dr. Liesenfelt is looking for feedback. Hey, let them know. Run some math on it. Beat it up.
Peer review me.
Peer review it, please, folks. We're asking
That's right.
For a general community peer review, because we know that peer review doesn't mean, yeah, I posted it on Twitter and a bunch of people yelled at me. That's not peer review. We need smart people to look at it very hard and apply some rigor and continue to have the conversation. Dr. Liesenfelt, I appreciate you coming on Cardano Live today.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll keep the conversation going. We'll check out what kind of feedback you get, and maybe we'll do this again after
later today. I'm going to post an updated chart of what K effective is after Coinbase has been welcomed to our network.
There you go.
It probably won't increase K effective, but it's important just to quantify what that change is and see it.
Yeah, and it's important to get that ADA staked. So I'm glad we got that, and we'll see the effects. Hey, thanks for everything you do. I would like to thank the viewers. Thanks for everyone here who's participated and asking questions. Appreciate that as well. Feel free to share this video with your friends, with your family. Let them know what's going on. We've got a lot of good folks over at Cardano, and we're doing great stuff. We're going for #1 all day, every day. I'll see you out there and around the space. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.